You can compare the visits before and after the localization and see if there's a peak. If there's no peak, it might be for different reasons, but that will be a starting point to analyze. So if there's a peak, how do people reach the website? If your English website is reached through SEO, have you done SEO research for that specific market, or you just translated the website and hoping it's gonna rank? It's really important to do it before launching into a market to understand the product is needed, but maybe you need to change your approach. Maybe the kind of product that you're offering is not known as a category in that market, so you might need to do more educational content. You don't have one single approach that works every time, because if your strategy actually is starting like sales is crucial, you need to have sales. You definitely cannot go in another country and hope that it's gonna work completely different. You still have to start with that.
In this episode, we're going to talk about how to scale your SaaS internationally via internet expansion and localization strategies. My guest today is Nicola Calabrese, founder of Undertow, a localization agency specializing in helping SaaS businesses grow internationally. Nicola brings over a decade of experience in localization, having managed translation and localization projects for startups and enterprises in more than 20 languages. He's also the host of the Multilingual Content Podcast, where he delves into international expansion, multilingual content strategies, and localization technologies. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Hi, Joran, and nice to be here.
We're going to dive right in. I always start with the question, why? Why is going international important for B2B SaaS founders today?
In general, especially if I'm thinking about European SaaS, the company usually find that their own home market gets too small too quickly. So thinking international from the get-go, it's very important to have a better reach across different users in the rest of the world. And the other thing is competition. Most likely your competition is already in different markets, depending on the vertical that you're addressing. So if you want to catch up with them, you cannot show up in English in a country where English is not a language that is commonly used, for example. Let's say, for example, in Germany, you cannot compete with companies that offer German user interface and content if you're just showing up in English.
You mentioned right from the beginning, but you often see startups first focus on their home country. In our case, being Europeans, you see indeed in France, going to France, Germany, going to Germany, Dutch less because we're smaller. But I guess, like, when should somebody start thinking about going international?
So if you're a European company, it's best to keep that in mind from the beginning, but that doesn't mean that you have to start like going international from the very beginning. You have to first absolutely to nail down the product market fit, because if you try to expand before you have that, you're just going to spread yourself too thin and it's going to be really difficult to be successful. And the other thing that you can keep an eye on is active users from other countries. If your product is, let's say, only available in English, but you start seeing a lot of users in some countries, despite of not having their language available, that's really like a signal for you to think about, okay, so maybe it might make sense to make at least the app available in that language and see if the market can grow, and we take it from there.
Yeah, start in English if you're going to go international. And then I guess if people start complaining that the app is not available in Spanish or any other language, then you can start thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a big signal. If you have user literally asking you begging you to make the app available in their language, that's definitely a market worth looking into, especially if it's a big market like Spain, Germany, or France.
When we talk about going global, what are some common misconceptions SaaS founders have about that?
There's a couple I see often. The first and the main one is thinking the same strategy will work exactly the same across all the countries. That's not possible because the user behaviors are different, market are different. Sometimes also like cultural norms around some things are different, or some pain points that are very important in your home market, they fall flat in another country. So again, if you go into Germany, they're probably gonna care much more about the regulation around data privacy than maybe if you're coming from the US, for example. That's not a big issue. You need to adjust your communication style and your strategy. And the other one is that AI can do it also. You can just rely on AI for translation and hoping for the best. That can actually lead to some, let's say funny results, but obviously like disasters for your brand, because you're going to damage your reputation even before you start. Because you enter a market, people don't know you. The first thing they see is some sentences that sound weird and funny. That's not a great way to present yourself to users and customers.
Yeah. In the end, it could be indeed a lazy way to say, oh, we're just going to translate everything using AI into X number of languages, but then you end up with some funny situations probably.
You're not giving a fair chance to some markets. You might see we're not getting traction in this market, but it might be because you haven't put a proper effort in that. So that's another thing that is really important, like to let's say, make your effort organized when you go into a market, not go into too many markets at the same time without the proper resources, because the risk is that you don't have enough resources to follow up properly on each market and support them enough to see them grow.
You answered the next question already, but when we talk about common mistakes, when you see companies going international, you mentioned, I guess, not every country is different. So copy your playbook, you have cultural differences, don't go into many markets at the same time. What other common mistakes SaaS founders make?
Not investing too much in proper market research and localization, in the sense that not just language, not just the translation, but understand like you might have to change your whole go-to-market strategy, investing in support. For example, if you're entering a market and there's a component in your go-to-market strategy where you need support from, let's say, humans, you need somebody in the market that is able to actually give support to users and customers in that market. So that's something that sometimes I see, that then you see there's not much traction because people sign up for your app, then they run into a problem, their help center maybe, it might even be localized, but they want to get in touch with somebody and there's nobody who speaks the language in the company. That's a big blocker, obviously, for them.
Yeah, and I think you have an interesting point. It's not just translating the app, it's also doing the support, the help center articles, maybe even blog content. If you are going to do it, you probably have to do it properly and not just one piece of it.
Yeah, and also the marketing as well. Like most of the times with B2B SaaS, you have to differentiate the, let's say, product part and the product languages and marketing languages. You might need a product in like 40 languages because your customers have users all over the world. But then the people actually making the decision to buy your software are just in a couple of countries. So you can just focus the marketing efforts on there. And that means that you can allocate resources for localization in a smarter way. You maybe have a couple of languages that you go with marketing. So you have all the documentations and the sales collateral that you might need to provide to sales teams to be effective in the market, just for decision makers. And then you got, on the other hand, the app may be available in more languages with the help center to support the users so they don't raise too many tickets, and that doesn't put a strain on your support team.
Yeah, nice. We're going to talk about common misconceptions. Let's turn it around where we're going to talk about, I guess, if somebody's listening now and we want to go global, we want to go into new markets, what would be like the best way to do? We can start from the beginning. What would be a step-by-step approach for them?
Yeah, so there's not, let's say, one single way that you can do exactly the same formula over and over, because obviously every company and market is different. But in general, the first point will be to analyze the market, understand what are the pain points in that market. If let's say, the buyer persona, they're going to be the same, the user persona, are they going to be the same? The use cases for the app in that market, are they going to be the same? And then see if you need to adjust. Look at the customer journey, how it is, and identify, for example, the very minimum, all the little pieces that you have to have in place as an initial experience, at least, so they get a consistent experience throughout the funnel, so they can get attracted, converted, and then actually supported throughout, so they renew as well. And then put together the tech stack that you need to have in place for all these things to work and not break as soon as you want to scale. See who's going to do what, launch an initial experience, gather data, and iterate. It's similar to developing a new product, launching in a new market, and then you iterate on that. So maybe the initial experience is very minimal, so you don't have a huge website. You just start with a micro website and grow it. Maybe you don't do all the features, or you have different apps and you just start with one because there's one user that you're actually targeting, and then you build on that over time. So don't expect to do all at once, because that will be impossible. Not even huge companies with a lot of resources do that, like just go with everything at once, but just start with the minimum that you need to be successful and build on it.
Figure out if your buyer persona is the same as the product user, identify the minimal localization strategy, create the tech stack around it so you can actually translate everything, create a team around it, and then launch in a new market with as minimum as possible to figure out if it's enough.
Yeah.
You mentioned don't launch into multiple markets at the same time. In this case,
you can, but don't launch in it's not usually best to launch in like a 50 market at once, especially if you're a small team. It will be very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Probably mostly interesting for EU companies, right? Or non-US countries. Have you seen US companies trying to get into Europe? What would be the best approach for them? Because they're used of everybody speaking English. And now you come into a region where we have a different language for every country. Like, what would you recommend them doing?
The first thing is to keep in mind that Europe is very fragmented in the sense that even if countries are not as big as the US, the individual countries are very different with different user behavior and also like the way people are dressed. People, for example, you're coming from the US. In some countries, there are different level of formalities that are crucial to nail if you want to be relevant and not dismissed. In that case, from the US, obviously, you can start on the main markets usually, which tends to be Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Those are the big four. I would recommend doing your market research because depending on the vertical that you're addressing, there might be other markets that are more relevant or maybe where there's less competition. Sometimes companies go into the UK first because it's in English, but competition is tough for some verticals. At the end of the day, it would actually be better to go in other markets in Europe where you might have to invest in localization a little bit, but the return is much better because you have much less competition than in the UK, where basically with English, the barrier of entry is lower.
Yeah, in the end, a lot of companies will go for UK first rather than a different region. When we talk about implementing the expansion strategy, are there any resources, processes, frameworks, anything, I guess, you would recommend people would check out to implement this even more successfully?
So what we usually apply is something similar to what I explained before, the minimum viable experience framework. That's the analysis of the customer journey, looking at each customer touch point and see what is the minimum that you have to have in place so customers can get through the whole funnel, supported in their own language. So let's say, for example, they don't jump suddenly on an English page or something that might look sketchy in some countries. When you have everything in your language and suddenly you end up on an English page in English, that might look a bit sketchy or not like make you doubt, are they going to be supporting me when I actually use this across the company? Especially when we're talking about B2B, these are like decision to roll out the software then to a company. They want to make sure that it's the right software and they're going to get support afterwards. It's not just the initial contract signing.
Yeah, I used to work at a company where we grew internationally quickly. We first started with sales in the local language. I was, for example, the first person who spoke Dutch. And then when we got a lot of clients, in the end, I ended up doing the customer success as well because I was the only person speaking Dutch. And then from there, I guess the more clients we got, the more people we hired with a certain language skill. Is that like a good approach to do it, or would you recommend it differently?
In your case, it's probably fine because it depends if you're, let's say, sales-led or maybe in some cases you're product-led. So you're starting from the product from a different segment of customers. And then when you want to, let's say, capture the enterprise customer in that market, that's when you bring sales in maybe and have more, let's say, structure. Maybe you even set up a company depending on how you're working. That's what I meant by you don't have one single approach that works every time, because if your strategy actually is starting like sales is crucial, you need to have sales. You definitely can go in another country and hope that it's going to work completely different. You still have to start from there.
If a SaaS founder is listening and they think, hey, I want to start with this soon, is there anything they could do today to prepare themselves to go more international, to go into different regions?
Well, the first thing I recommend is to analyze the current user base to see if they already have some like users in some countries, and then they know the vertical they're addressing, so they know which are the, let's say, most important markets. So if you start seeing that you already have some users in a market that is potentially interesting for you, that's something to think about. And after that will be analyzing deeper that market and figure out what's the minimum that you have to in place. So if you need salespeople, how are you going to do it? Are you going to have salespeople from your home office, headquarter, working remotely, or are you going to hire remote people? Are you going to, because sometimes you need for legal reason to have a legal entity in the country. So that's something as well to consider before launching.
Are you struggling to find a cost-effective and scalable marketing channel? Check out Reditus. We help you to have other people recommend your SaaS, and you would only pay them when they deliver you paid clients, making it a very cost-effective and scalable marketing channel. Want to learn more? Go to getreditus.com. If we're going international or go more localized, like what kind of metrics would you recommend people to track in the early stage to figure out if it's actually a good market to go in, but also to continue on?
If they have already launched an initial experience, they're starting to see at least traction, in the sense that you see, for example, if you localize your website, you start seeing, you can compare the visits before and after the localization and see if there's a peak. If there's no peak, it might be for different reasons, but there will be a starting point to analyze. So if there's a peak, how do people reach the website? If your English website is reached through SEO, have you done SEO research for that specific market, or you just translated the website and hoping it's going to rank? If it's through PPC campaigns, that allows you to see other PPC campaigns that are actually not working. So people click on that, but they're not relevant ones. So when they get to the website, they drop off. and then see churn. If they have activation and churn as usual for the app to see if there's a difference before and after localization.
Yeah, so in the end, it's looking at the same metrics, comparing country over country, website traffic, conversion rates.
It wouldn't be fair to compare them with your home market because that's already very well developed. But yeah, compare with the same country. And if you're going in several markets at the same time, maybe 2 or 3, which is usually what I recommend, you can compare the market among each other. So if you see, okay, so we're doing really well in this market, but in this one, not. And from market research, we should go well in both, try to understand, because your market research will help you understand as well if it's just the implementation that is not working, or if you made the market that is not ready for you. Because if you've done the market research, you're sure like your product is going to work there. That's why it's really important to do it before launching into a market, to understand the product is needed, but maybe you need to change your approach. Maybe the kind of product that you're offering is not known as a category in that market. So you might need to do more educational content. They learn your solution exists and then why your solution is the best. Because sometimes if in your home market, maybe you have other competitors doing exactly the same thing. But when you move to a new market, your competitor might be an Excel spreadsheet and people don't know that something like your solution exists. That's a different challenge.
Yeah. You have the home advantage that people know your brand. If you've been there longer, people know you. So going to different markets at the same time, you can compare those against each other rather than comparing them against your home market.
Yeah, again, I want to stress again, that's also why I said it's easier if you're like doing 3-5 markets compared if you're doing like 100 markets. That will be really stressful to measure and compare, especially if you're not a big team. If you have a big team, go for it. But usually you don't have too many people. Try to keep it small and then scale.
I think that's already somewhat of a best practice, right? Going global, going to different markets at the same time. Any other best practices on how to really go international?
Yeah, first of all, assign an owner, like somebody that owns that market in your company. That's sometimes underestimated or overlooked. Like you have to have one person in charge of that market in the sense that they will be responsible for looking over the international expansion in that market. And then use a translation management system, a platform that allows you to have a single source of truth across the company. So all the content, all the strings that are going to be translated, they're going to be on the same platform. You can keep databases, previous translations and reuse them. You can have glossaries. So everybody across product, support, and marketing are going to use the same terminology in the market. So that it's not confusing for the users. Also have style guides for each market. Put down a document that says how the brand speaks in that market. So you have things like form of address, for example, like a level of formality, different channels, different way of communicating. So maybe on social media, you use a certain tone of voice, but maybe it changes slightly when you go into white papers. But it needs to be written down because when you start having teams working on content and product, you have different people. Everybody's going to do things slightly different. So that's a way as well for you to keep the brand consistent in that market, which is a similar to the English brand. You have to do it for different markets as well. That's why it's, again, I recommend like going like slowly and then build up. And the last thing is document processes. So establish some processes and document them, because if you document them, that's also the best way then to improve them. When you put them down, you see that overly complicated and you want to simplify them. If it's just in somebody's head, first of all, not everybody maybe is on the same page. They don't know what's going to happen. And if you are onboarding new people to work on a new market, you can take the process that you use for a previous market, and if not all of them, most of them, you can apply them to the new market, especially internal processes, like how you're going to send the translation request, how you keep updated the glossaries, what are the approval steps for different kind of content.
I like it because you're going to run into so many things you probably haven't figured out when you're going to go into new markets. If you're going to document it, at least you know the next time, oh yeah, we need to think about X, Y, Z. You mentioned create your formalities. Is there a name for a document like that? Normally you would think about SaaS positioning, but this goes further. How do you actually communicate and how do you want to, what is the name of a document like this?
A document like this is called usually a style guide, and includes also things like, are you going to write numbers? For example, are you going to put 1,000? Is it going to be with a full stop in between 1 and 0? Is it going to be a comma? Is it going to be a space? Those little details, they make it relevant for the actual people in the market. When they see it, they see things written in the way they're used to. So that's because in some countries you don't have maybe a standard, so there's different way to do that. So you don't want to have a document where maybe 1,000 is written with a space in between 1 and 0, and in another document you're 1 point. There's like attention to detail that gives direction to who is writing and translating content, so they know exactly how they're going to treat those kind of things. Dates as well. Are you going to maybe abbreviate the There's all these little details that you have. That's why it's called a style guide, similar to editorial teams.
Yeah, yeah. I guess you can build it along with going international. You're going to run into things where you think, how we're actually going to do that. It's almost like an ongoing process where you keep iterating it all the time.
Yeah, like a trick is you can take as a starting point Microsoft style guides. Microsoft makes available the style guides in all the languages that they do, and they do a lot of languages. So you're probably going to find one for the languages you want to go into. So you can take that as a starting point. So they've done like most of the, let's say, groundwork of all the details. Then you can customize it. But they make it available online.
We talked about it quite a bit already, but localization, like really translating everything into the local language. How important is it really to localize everything?
You don't need to localize everything, in the sense that there might be some features, some content that is not relevant for your target market. But you do need to, what you decide that is important and you decide to localize, it needs to be done properly, because that shows that you care to the users in the country. If they see that it's just a very badly translated document, they're going to, in the mind of the customer, the brand is going to be damaged, because they're going to think you don't really care about their market. Otherwise, you would have invested in having proper text written, or the app. Sometimes testing the app for users in different markets makes a difference, because maybe the translation is correct, but it's just not easy to use as much as it is in English. Sometimes there's a lot of time and effort spent on the English app to make it work, like great user experience. Then you go into a new market and nobody has tested it. The translations are correct, but the user experience is not great, because some things, once you have them in context, or you're trying to do the actual flow of a scenario, it is not working as you expected. The user may get more confused and frustrated. There's a lot of effort on the English, but sometimes not on the target market. And this is well something that show that you care, that you took the time to have a look at the app, test it in the language, and see it works. You have a smooth user experience there as well.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned before, like it's the first impression sometimes people get. And if it looks a bit off, or I guess funny or scrappy, then it might do the opposite than what you're trying to have it done. What is a popular belief out there right now, maybe even on LinkedIn in general, where you completely disagree with right now?
I would say not everybody, but some people think AI is a great tool. It's improving so fast and is getting to very great level. But I see that some people think that, yeah, maybe not right now, but like shortly, we're going to be able to do everything with AI that relates to localization. I don't agree with that, in the sense that there's still a component of strategy in general, understanding your customers. That's really something that is not so easy for an AI, at least not with the current capability and what looks like it's going to be in the future. You still have to have people in the market that have the cultural sensibility as well, and the market knowledge. The more niche your product is, the more important that is, because obviously AI, even if you train them, sometimes they don't have enough data to understand the nuances of your specific target audience. So that's important, and user behaviors as well change. Because I still see, even with the grade level the AI gets, I have like funny translations. Yeah, like for example, I've seen one website where they were saying literally give pleasure to your customer, but in Italian it sounded like sexual pleasure to your customers, and it was like a ERP platform, so it had nothing to do with that. Imagine you're an Italian company owner, you're looking at the website or a product you're considering, you see that and you think they're not serious in my market. How are they going to support me if they don't even took the time to the main web page? I'm not saying like an obscure help center article. So the main web page is saying something like this. That means they don't really care about my market. So maybe I'd rather go with some competitor that actually has proper content on the website.
Yeah, makes sense. You're being put off right from the beginning, going to the site.
You don't want to be laughed at.
Any free marketing is marketing, but it's not always good. This is one of the challenges people might face going international. Cultural differences could be a big challenge. Any insights there, and any other challenges companies would face going international?
One big challenge is balancing adapting to the target market and staying, let's say, true to their brand. So you want to adapt to the market, but you cannot, let's say you're going into 10 markets, you cannot have 10 different products that will be unmanageable. 10 completely different products, 10 completely different positioning, that will be really difficult to manage. So the idea is to find a balance. You can adapt what can be adapted, but not completely redo the product. So maybe if you feel that there's a feature that they really need in a target market, maybe it's worth like exploring, is it a feature that maybe it's useful in other markets as well? So before you invest in that feature, you look into other markets. The same for tone of voice and the way you communicate. To have the brand ethos, like, is always keep the brand values consistent, not change them for each country, just change the form of address and the way you speak. Maybe you don't make too many jokes in Germany because if for your target market there it doesn't work. You are a bit more formal maybe in France because your target audience there expect a more formal form of address, but you don't change completely your values for every country you go in. That's a recommendation I would give.
Yeah, at one point you have no idea who you are anymore and what countries is doing what, basically.
And it becomes really difficult to manage as well. From a brand point of view, yeah, you're basically fragmented, and on the other hand, it's really difficult to manage.
Yeah. When we look into the future, how do you see the future of internationalization? You mentioned, of course, AI not being the great choice right now to do your translation. Do you see it being different in the future or any other trends?
It's definitely going to be more and more. It's constantly improving, and that's going to lower the barrier for going global in the sense that it will allow a lot of companies, if they want to start and launch their website or their app in many languages easily. What's going to make all the difference then, if everybody can go global with a click of a button, the difference is going to be the companies that do it properly. So they actually look into what we discussed before, like looking what the customers are looking for, how they want to be addressed, what are they actually pain point and needs, and then adapting to those, not just automatically translate everything. So that's going to show. That's the challenge that it's going to be because everybody can be global, but on the other end, it's an opportunity because if you do it properly, you can show you care to international customers and users. That will make a lot of difference. It will show. It does show.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Like, I think indeed it's not just translating the text just by putting it into AI and have it spit out like different languages. Like, you can see if people really care. And in my case, I guess, like non-native English, like I can definitely see if somebody created something by themselves in Dutch or they have it done by an AI.
There's a difference when you go in it with English, especially in B2B. A lot of times English is a very used language, so people can understand it maybe in the market. But when you go with their own language, that's especially when it comes to marketing, is a little more easier to get in touch with, let's say, the emotional side of things rather than just the functional sort of things if you're speaking their language and in a way that resonates with them.
And maybe I guess a different question here, because for example, like we can choose as a European company, I guess, to go to different regions in Europe. How do you see it with companies you help? Do they often just say, let's skip all the localization, let's just go English only and go to the US and the UK where the markets are big enough to begin with? How do you see that?
It depends on the vertical they're addressing. Because one of the things that when you go to the UK and the US, in most categories, it's going to be really competitive. That's one of the main reasons why some companies decide to start with European countries, because you go to other European countries, there's not much competition there. So you might have to face local companies that are not maybe as big as yours or as have a different product. So your product is actually better. So you're getting there. And in other cases, they might just face competition from others that don't have localized content and presence. Maybe they don't have salespeople or support teams that speak the language. That's going to be an easier competition than going to the US, which is still, sometimes it is the case that they decide to go first to the US and then afterwards, let's say, come back to Europe. When they expand further with the revenue they get from the US, they invest in going back to Europe. It really depends case by case. I wouldn't say there's one single way companies do it. And again, it depends on the company. I wouldn't recommend one way or the other. You just analyze and figure out there could be a way to go to the US first and then come back. Or maybe in your specific case, it will be more useful to go to Europe first and then maybe consider tackling the US, which I know it's not an easy market.
Yeah. When I look at our company, we wanted to go global from day one, but we did everything organically as well. So we didn't even focus with our marketing or paid ads on certain region because we just did everything on organic. I can say it's not the easiest thing to do because you're not really focusing on a specific market, even though we did everything in English. So we targeted US mainly, but now it's working out. But at the beginning, it was quite challenging.
Yeah, and again, it depends. Let's say, for example, product companies might have it, let's say, easier in a way because they might start from users signing up, especially if it's not only B2B. Maybe there's a B2C component. I spoke with the people at Canva. They started with 100 languages off the bat, but obviously there was single users starting using it, and that obviously grew the user base in different countries. It allowed them to expand further. So it really depends on the case. Usually for B2B, SaaS is a little bit more tricky to go in too many markets at the same time because you need a different level of support than maybe like B2C apps.
Yeah, because in the end, our apps are going to be more complicated than B2C indeed. What is the biggest risk or maybe even biggest opportunity SaaS founders should prepare for in 2025?
The biggest risk is the fact that in a way, everybody can be global. You can have competitors that are accessible in your language, in your country. So you might have, especially for categories that are really competitive, you might have like different competitors already in a market. AI, obviously, it makes it easier. But the opportunity will be that, again, most companies, I still see they don't invest properly in expansion. With AI making it easier, it might give the false perception that you don't need to invest in entering a new market that much. So that means if you do it properly, you have a competitive advantage. Because again, they might have the app and the website translated badly or rightly, but then maybe they don't have support and other sales. They don't have an actual, maybe a message that is adapted for that specific market, addressing specific pain points.
And I guess my next question is might even trying to have you summarize it in 2 sentences. So if, let's say, you have to summarize your best advice on internationalization in 1 or 2 sentences for B2B SaaS founders, what would it be?
It would be start small and then scale.
And when you say start small, you mean with a couple of markets at the same time, right?
A couple of markets at the same time with a minimum viable experience. You don't start with everything localized, just the minimum you need to get started, but to start it properly.
Yeah. Nice. We're going to dive into the final 2 questions, and this can be more general. So when we talk about growing a B2B SaaS company, what advice would you give a SaaS founder who's just starting out and trying to grow to 10K monthly recurring revenue?
We're talking about international expansion. Make sure you have product market fit before you even think about international expansion. I guess so many things on your plate that will just be an additional headache. So make sure you have a product market fit. Then you can start thinking about international expansion.
Yeah. So don't even think about it before 10K MRR. Often product.
If you don't have a product market fit, no. You have other things to focus on, I think,
Yeah. So when we then, I guess, surpass 10K MRR and we're now growing towards 10 million ARR, so a huge step. This is also where you're going to have product market fit. What would be the advice to SaaS founders here?
If you haven't already, start preparing for international expansion. As we discussed, there's so many different things to keep in mind and prepare. So start from there and again, start small and then scale. First of all, do market research on the markets that you want to enter. Analyze your current use base to see where you already have a user active in different countries. Then analyze your customer journey, prepare the tech stack, prepare the teams, and then launch the initial experience, gather data, and iterate on your findings. But the market research is really important because it will guide you in your market expansion.
Nice. Let me see if I try to summarize. If you're going to think about going international, nail your product market fit before even going international. Reminder, every country is different. Don't copy playbooks. It will have cultural differences, formalities. Be prepared for that. Where you are going to localize things, do it properly so that you actually show you care. It is going to be the first impression people get from you. Analyze current user base, so to discover potential areas you can actually go into 2 to 3 markets, or you mentioned even 3 to 5 markets at the same time, because it allows you to compare against each other rather than comparing it against your home market. Assign an owner to become responsible for the market. And when you are going to go into different markets, do country market research first. Check if the buyer persona is the same as the product user, because you might need to localize things differently there. Identify minimum viable experience. Create a tech stack, set up your local team, launch a new experience, and create a style guide. We're going to add the example from Microsoft. Document your processes because it's easier then to improve them so you can reuse them going into new markets. Challenges you're going to run into. Keep the brand value consistent in any market. Everything can be global with AI now, but you can stand out by showing you care by investing into localization. When we talk about revenue stages, 10K MR, don't think about international expansion. And for 10 million AR, follow the steps and start preparing for internationalization.
That was a really good summary.
Yeah. All your words. And again, no AI being used here.
It's impressive. It's impressive.
Nice. Any final notes before we jump off?
If anybody have any question about this, obviously feel free to reach out and check out the Multilingual Content Podcast.
If people want to get in contact with you, how can they do? What is the best way?
But they get in touch on LinkedIn. And then, as I said again, you can check out the Multilingual Content Podcast.
Yeah, we'll do. We're going to add links to your LinkedIn, to the podcast. People can find you. We're going to add a link to the example from Microsoft so people can get started right away. For people listening on Spotify, leave us a review. It's going to help us to boost the algorithms. And we're going to add a poll towards the podcast. So always happy to hear what you thought of this. Thanks again for coming on, Nicola.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for watching this show of the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. You made it till the end, so I think we can assume you like this content. If you did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like this content, feel free to reach out if you want to sponsor the show, if you have a specific guest in mind, if you have a specific topic you want us to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to take a look at it. If you want to know more about Reditus, feel free to reach out as well. But for now, have a great day and good luck growing your B2B SaaS.